And I'd love to officially welcome you to this Ashoka Huddle, and also to welcome David to the fellowship. This is one of his first sort of enterings into the Ashoka Network, not even publicly announced yet, but yes, known within the Ashoka family. Yeah, really excited to, the way that we often think about systems change at Ashoka is looking at like what is, across time, what is the amount of control that you can give up and give over to a field, empowering other people to pick up your work, right? So we often talk about the difference between direct and indirect impact. Direct impact is the service that your actual organization can directly give to its constituents. And Ashoka and the fellows that you are and work with and the work that you do is often looking also at that indirect impact. How do we equip other people to move this idea forward? How do I be the hill of impact and not the king of the hill, the thing that people can build on? And one really important aspect of that is the tool that is open sourcing. But it's often like this beautiful umbrella topic that encapsulates a lot of things, but actually also kind of acts as a black box when it comes to how do I actually do this? And we're so thrilled to welcome David to the Ashoka Fellowship. I'll let him explain a bit more of his work, but is an architect of the educational commons. He's someone whose work is directly driving down things like textbook costs and finding ways to share information in a more accessible way. So the work that he does in the education world is also really applicable to people who are thinking, social entrepreneurs who are thinking about how to open their impact, and came into the fellowship immediately willing to help hold conversations and be a resource for other fellows. So it's really wonderful to welcome you and introduce you, David. And just to like see that sort of spirit of sharing our work and our learning is already something that you're so fully stepping into. So thanks for being here. I'd love to invite you to share a bit more about your work and how you come to this, how you approach the commons. And just looking at, well, let's start there, and maybe like I'm seeing questions coming up and I'll share them in the chat. But where are the places to start? What does it really mean to open your intellectual property rather than just sharing it willingly? Like, what's the difference in making it official? I'll share these questions in the chat as we go, but for now, David of Lumen Learning, why don't you tell us a bit about your work and how you're coming into the conversation?
Sure. So first, thank you for the invitation. It's fun to get to participate in one of these. I've watched a couple of recorded ones and have already benefited from other people's huddles, so it's good to get to participate in one. I come to the work as I was a longtime faculty member at university. My area is educational technology, and I've been working in kind of the intersection of open source and education since the late 90s. And so a lot of that started in my own classroom with doing things myself and kind of little experiments with being open and then being more open and being more open and seeing the benefit of that play out over time, and then becoming an advocate for open approaches after I saw the benefits of it in my own work and with my own students. And just really old, doing it a long time, old in the field anyway. And there is often a lot of kind of hesitation around the idea of giving up control at the beginning. Because I think the one rule of openness that everyone should understand is that that openness facilitates the unexpected. When you make your work open, you'll anticipate what you think people are going to do with that and how it's going to be beneficial and how that's going to roll out and how it will work. But generally speaking, people will not do what you expect. They'll do things that are way more awesome than what you expect. But none of those things could happen if you held on to control really tightly, or if you only gave people permission to engage in the activities that you thought were going to be important and useful, because it turns out that we don't know all the things we need to know. And being open is one way of approaching your work with some humility, saying there are other people who are going to have different perspectives on this, different needs. Local circumstances are going to differ in ways that I can't anticipate and plan for. And so really the best way for me to create this indirect impact, you can't create indirect impact, you can enable, facilitate, empower indirect impact, is to give people all the permission they need to go do the things that they can see need to be done locally where they're standing, that you can't see from where you are. My favorite metaphor, I think, for this kind of work, Eric Raymond is a name you might recognize if you're familiar with open source at all or have been doing any kind of digging or reading around. Eric wrote some of the very first influential essays about open source that convinced the first companies to open source their software. But he also wrote an essay about the kinds of business models that are possible in the context of open. And one of those business models that he lays out, he calls "give away the recipe, open a restaurant." And I think this is the perfect metaphor for kind of talking about direct versus indirect impact. When you open a restaurant, you can directly serve people that can get to your restaurant, that are local to you and able to be there and can afford it and are interested in eating the recipe the way that you prepare it. But if you also release the recipe out into the wild, in the open, and we'll say a little bit more about what open means specifically, but by putting the recipe out there, you empower people to serve themselves. They can make it at home if they want. You enable others to serve others by starting their own restaurants in another town where you don't have that kind of reach and extent. So this idea of giving away the recipe and opening a restaurant, I think, is a really nice metaphor for thinking about direct versus indirect impact. And obviously, with your restaurant or even your chain of restaurants, you can't feed all the people who you wish you could feed. But if you enable others to make the dish at home or to serve it in their own restaurant somewhere else, then you're going to greatly extend your impact. So I keep throwing around this word open, and I just want to do kind of 5 or 10 minutes of framing right here at the beginning and then really have more of a discussion. But when you think about open in this context, open is a way to think about managing the exclusive rights that come to you as a copyright holder. So whether you've created some kind of copyrightable content like videos or text materials, how-to materials, advertisements, whatever it might be that you've created that's content, or any kind of software that you create. Open source kind of comes to us from software and then only later comes to content. It's the idea of taking those exclusive rights that are automatically granted to you by copyright, whether you want them or not, that make it illegal for other people to make copies of your work or to make any changes to your work or to redistribute your work, and turn that around and say, I'm hereby taking a copyright license, a formal legal instrument, and I'm applying it to this copyrighted work to make it clear to everyone else in the world that you actually have my permission to download copies of this, to translate it into Spanish if that's what you need to do, to pull out ingredients that aren't available in your locale and substitute others into the recipe, and also to distribute either the verbatim copy that they've acquired of your video or your how-to guide or whatever it might be, to distribute the verbatim copies of that, or the right to distribute the translated version of that, or maybe they added captions to your video, or whatever it was that they did to make that resource that you've created more useful to them and the folks that they work with. It's really about giving them permission to download, to edit, and then to share, whether that's your software or the resources that you've created. The approach is a little different for software than it is for content. So, depending on what you each are doing and what you're interested in potentially open sourcing, the conversation can go a couple directions. So let me just kind of call the question. As you think about the kinds of things you're interested in potentially open sourcing, and you can either jump on the mic or type in the chat, whatever you're more comfortable with. Are you more interested in software or things that aren't software?
And it actually might be, I sort of skipped a chance to have the 4 folks on the call introduce themselves. So I'm sorry that I skipped that step, and that might help bring these questions to life a little bit. So David, if you don't mind, I'm going to backtrack.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Megan, Crystal, Randy, Amanda, because we sort of like filtered in one at a time, it slipped my mind. But please, why don't we just take a 30 seconds a person, but who are you? What's your work? Just to color in these things. And then maybe also to speak to David's question, what are the things you're thinking about open sourcing? Just to, kick us off.
I'll jump in. Thanks, Brittany. Hi, I'm Megan Marcus. I'm the CEO and founder of Fuel Ed, and we are an organization that was founded about 5 years ago. We just had our birthday on Monday, and we were founded to fill a gap in educator preparation. So traditional teacher prep focuses on the technical side of teaching and learning, content knowledge, and pedagogy, but so much of an educator's job and their effectiveness and their ability to transform students' lives has to do with the relationships they build. And so our mission is to improve student outcomes by developing the social and emotional competencies of educators so that they could build strong and healthy relationships in schools that drive learning and development. So we are currently exploring open sourcing our content, but because so much of what we believe about how learning happens is through relationship, we're trying to figure out a way to couple the content with experiential in the way that we try to get it out there. And then just, curious about how to also more so support people on that process. So I guess both content and process.
Welcome, Megan. Crystal, I have you next on my screen.
Okay, I'm Crystal. I work for MAC UK. We are an organisation in London that works with young men involved in gang violence. I think what we are, and we've developed an innovative way of working with them. And what we are looking and considering sharing is all our manuals. We have like 8 years of testing and piloting. So all the manuals and the knowledge we gained all those 8 years, we would like to share, because our wider vision is to change the system around these young people rather than, delivering the services ourselves.
Welcome, Crystal. Then I have Randy and Amanda.
Hi, I'm Randy Lee. I'm Strategic Initiatives Officer at Playworks, and the majority of my work is actually focused on the unleashing pieces of our work. We set an aim about 2 years ago that requires that we open up the majority of what we do. And we've already been down the path on training other organizations like Boys and Girls Club or City Year to deliver Playwork services, basically giving them the training and letting them run with it. And I'm also involved in building online learning and do-it-yourself resources on our website, which we really would like to open up, but we're starting from scratch. So it's kind of a combination of figuring out what we have that can be put online in a useful way, and then figuring out how to layer on open to that. So it's a big task, sort of starting from scratch.
I'm Amanda, and I work for Substantial. We're a startup nonprofit incubated at Playworks, so also Randy's colleague. And Substantial is working on redesigning substitute teaching, the experience of substitute teaching for students, for the subs, and teachers who are entrusting their students with subs. We're trying to do systems level work, so that means we're also working with the school district folks as one of our primary places of entry. And we're aspiring to open up this challenge and get more people in education to think about what we could be doing with substitutes as an opportunity and opening. So I think we're really committed to trying to open the space, not own the space. And we're trying to figure out, we have an intention of being open, and we're trying to figure out how that makes sense. And it's at the moment, I don't even know the contours of what that looks like, other than I'm thinking a lot about those HR people and how to engage them in a way that gets anything done.
So a great thing that I'm hearing in all 4 of these introductions, and thank you so much for joining us, is it sounds like this is a pretty content heavy kind of like, or like course, tool, template training theme, a non-software theme is what I'm hearing. Correct me if I'm wrong, any of the 4 of you, which is great. And maybe we just invite focusing on that a little bit more, helping that direct us as something that everyone on the call shares. And I think that is honestly more common across other fellows who might listen to this later. So yeah, so David, thank you for letting me pause and rewind, and let's push play again on some of the things that you were using to set the stage.
Yeah, that's great. Play is always great. So, you know, in as much as we're talking about content and opening content, you know, well, first let me address this question that kind of came up. What's the difference between being open versus just kind of sharing freely? The primary difference here is about whether your content is under glass or not, right? So. Or as my brother-in-law used to say to my youngest child, you can look, but don't touch. Don't touch anything in our house. You know, with content, like the entire internet is full of free content, right? YouTube is free, CNN is free. Like you don't pay money to go look at pictures on Pinterest or things like that. But all content is copyrighted unless you proactively do something to change that. And when it's copyrighted, that means that you could post things on your organization's website that say, here's how to do this, here's how it works. But by default, people don't have permission to make copies of that, to translate it into Spanish or Mandarin or whatever they need to do, or redistribute those copies to others. They really only have permission to tell other people, hey, go look at this great website where this information is. And so it's kind of I think look but don't touch is really the best way to describe it. Whereas if you openly license your material, then people have the permission that they need to download copies of it so they have it offline, so they can take it other places, so they can translate it, or so they can pull out all the pictures that you have of inner city youth and replace them all with pictures of rural youth so that the manual looks like it makes more sense to the people that they're working with. Like making those kinds of changes and then making copies of those and giving them out to the youth. Those are all things that copyright prevents them from doing. In the case of copyright, well, in the case of materials that are copyrighted, because I can't copy them, all I can do is refer people to go look at them. Either you should buy so-and-so's book or you should visit their website, and I can kind of talk around it, but I can't actually open it up and tinker with it and use it in the way that I need to use it. So the difference between just putting things on your website versus making them open is the difference between whether you want people to make copies, make changes, make improvements, distribute those locally, use them locally, or do you really want everybody to be required to just refer back to your website because you're trying to drive traffic to your website for some reason? So that's the core difference. On the internet, basically everything is free, but many things are not open. Right? So for things to be open, they need to be free and they need to come with these copyright permissions that we're talking about to give people permission to make their own copies, to make changes to those copies, and to redistribute them. I'm going to screen share for a moment, if I may. Just share a browser window here. Now, in the context of openly licensing content, the kind of default, and really the far and away the most useful way to do that is to work with Creative Commons licenses here. Now, I can't see my screen sharing, but you guys tell me, is that big enough that you can read and kind of see what it says in the screen? Okay, I got a couple of heads sort of nodding. If not, I need you to wave or gesticulate in some way so that I know that you can't see what's here. But this is an example of a Creative Commons license. One of the hats I wear is I'm the Education Fellow at Creative Commons, and so I spend a lot of time thinking about how these licenses get applied in the education context. And just to give you a sense of how broadly Creative Commons licenses are used, every year or two, the organization works with search engine partners to do an audit of all materials online that are licensed under one of these open licenses. And in 2016, that number was just over 1.2 billion photographs, videos, essays, shareable content online, pieces of content that were licensed under a Creative Commons license specifically. So this is the de facto kind of standard for openly licensing your material. I just wanted to walk you through this in maybe a backward fashion chronologically, but just show you one of the licenses here. And this is the most popular license, certainly among educational projects. This is the attribution license. And well, let me say 30 seconds more about Creative Commons. Creative Commons, the organization, is a nonprofit that creates these licenses, makes sure that they operate all over the world in every jurisdiction, regardless of what the kind of little differences in local copyright law might be, and then advocates for people to share with each other. There are 6 Creative Commons licenses that are available. I'll show you some of that in a minute. But the one I really want to introduce you to is this attribution license. And you'll see here that this license tells people that they are free to copy and redistribute the material that's licensed this way in any medium or format, and to adapt the material as well. So to transform it, translate it, move it from one format to another, maybe to create a text transcript of a video or something like that. You're free to do all of these things under the following terms. So this starts to come around to some of the questions that we saw a minute ago. First, you must give appropriate credit and provide a link to this license and indicate if any changes were made. So, if Ashoka had published some guide to social impact under this Creative Commons attribution license, then I could make a copy of it. I could go through and add a bunch of cool graphics or infographics to it or something like that and create a new version. But when I distributed that new version, I'm required to give credit to Ashoka and to link back to where I downloaded the work from originally, so that there's always a way to get back to the original when people are reusing your work kind of downstream. I have to provide a link to this license that lets people understand what they are and aren't allowed to do. And I have to indicate if I've changed it in any way. Is this a verbatim copy, or is this something that that I've added imagery, or I've taken out some paragraphs that were applicable over here but not in my context. And I can do these things in any reasonable manner, as long as I don't do it in a way that suggests that Ashoka is a big fan of what I've done with their material, right? I can't try to suggest or imply that what I'm doing with the material is endorsed in any way by the people who created it in the first place. So I have to give that attribution, and then I can't do this, no additional restrictions. I can't have like a terms of use on my website or some other kind of legal conditions that would kick in that would interfere with the user's ability to share, adapt, engage in these activities that are permitted up above. I can't have any legal terms that do that, and I can't try to do something from a technological perspective that prevents them from doing it. So, like, say, one thing that I would not want to do. It's very common for people to distribute text materials as PDFs. And PDFs are great for a range of reasons, but you'll see that PDFs will make it very hard for me to remix or transform. Like, how do I open up that PDF and translate that material into Spanish or something like that? So it's okay to distribute PDFs there, but understand that there's some technological problems you might be causing for people that want to exercise these rights that you've granted them. Maybe you should also, in addition to sharing the PDF, maybe you should also share the InDesign source file that you used, or the Word document that you created the PDF from, so that there's a meaningful way for me to actually exercise these permissions that you've granted me by means of the open license. for the kind of legal geeks among us, it's fun. I always think it's fun to point out that this is the human readable summary of the license. There's a different version of the license for lawyers, that is people who are not humans. And here is that same license, which you can dig into at your leisure. Maybe when you're having trouble sleeping, sometime you can read through that. But this is the human readable version. It says what you're free to do under the following terms. And every Creative Commons license has one of these, what they call the deed, the human readable summary, and also has the kind of formal legal piece behind it. So let me stop screen sharing there before I get into kind of the details of if you wanted to do this, kind of what's the nitty gritty of how you would, and ask for questions just about CC the organization or the license or what it is the license is trying to enable or what it requires of people who are downstream from you, who exercise those permissions.
This is Randy. I have a question.
Yeah.
So we've thought about doing this, and in our thinking, we don't pretend to have discovered play or invented play, right? So we don't really feel like we own it in the first place, but we do feel like over the last 20 years, we've developed a set of principles around what safe and healthy play looks like. And so when we've been considering opening up content, we thought about publishing it with those principles and, almost asking for adaptions to be made in the spirit of those same principles. Is that something you would typically see, or is that adding like an undue burden or expectation to head in that direction?
Yeah, no, I think that would be really useful, and honestly, not enough people do something like that. So it would be great if when people publish material to train or to published openly licensed resources for introductory biology, for example, if you're going to take it at college. Here are a bunch of materials. It's all openly licensed. You can do whatever you want. Here are a statement of the principles that I was paying attention to as I designed that. And as you make your changes, you might want to try not to break it, or do things with it that are going to cause it to not function the way that we want it to function, because now these principles are only half implemented and you've contradicted those principles over here. So there's no way to kind of legally enforce that only changes that are in harmony with your set of 8 principles. There's no way to require that. But boy, it would be great if everybody were to provide information like that and say, as you make adaptations or improvements or localizations to this, keep in mind that these are the principles that we are trying to enact in creating the materials and that you ought to attend to as well. That would be terrific.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Follow-up question to that. Just want to make sure I understand Randy's question and your answer in light of it. So Randy was wondering if, in addition to just publishing the content, which it sounds like might be like an example of an activity of play, that she would actually publish the principles as to how to apply it, and that publication of those principles are open source themselves. So I mean, it kind of means even those could be changed and remixed.
Yeah. So I can sense the hesitancy in your voice. They're going to change my core principles of how this is going to be applied. And, you could choose not to openly license that. You could just put it on the website and leave it copyrighted, and people wouldn't be able to change that. But it doesn't mean that people couldn't come up with their own principles and use their own principles as they apply them there. And, there's this requirement that people indicate when they distribute something, they indicate whether changes have been made or not, and they don't imply that you endorse their changes, and they have to include a link back to the original. That does give you it gives many people some comfort that if changes are made downstream that people look at and think, I don't know, that seems a little dicey to me, that there's always a way to get back to the original and see what you intended and what you had published at first. And for better or worse, to attribute those changes to the people who made the changes and not try to attribute them to you.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
In that, I hear like or so many of Fellow content like is linked to training and methodology and its implementation. And I think that that's often one of the biggest hesitancies or sources of skepticism. Like, yeah, how do we maintain our brand identity or the integrity of like the training that we're doing? And Megan, I'm not necessarily talking about you, although I think that, you know, Fuel Ed is a good example of this. So how do you, how do you hold the like implementation with like open sourcing its steps, or how have you helped people think through that?
Yeah, I mean, so the first thing to think about there is that your brand, your name, your logo, those kinds of things are protected by trademark, not copyright. Those aren't the kinds of things that can be open sourced. And even these open licenses prohibit people who are using the materials that you've licensed openly from implying that you endorse the way that they're using them. And if you ever caught someone doing that, then you would reach out to them and say, you're in violation of the license and consequently you're violating my copyright, and cease and desist, or we have a longer, more expensive conversation to have. You know, so I'd say that as far as brand identity goes, with your name and your logo and things like that, that's IP that is protected legally, but not by copyright. And so open doesn't really enter into that. But as far as implementation fidelity, which is, I think, is what we would call it in the teaching and learning context anyway, this is something that people really do struggle with. Because on the one hand, you've spent years as an educator and a researcher, and you feel like you understand, at least in your context, you know, how the ways that this training can be rolled out or the way it can be implemented that will be higher impact rather than lower impact. And so there is an inclination to want to try to require everyone, you know, to work according to those rules that you have found work. And I totally get that impulse. At the same time, I think there's some healthiness. Is healthiness a word? There's something positive about recognizing that people are going to be they're going to be using whatever it is you provided in a context that you've never been in before, that it will be meaningfully similar to the context that you've worked in, but will also be meaningfully different. And local adaptation is a good thing, and we should encourage and want to support local adaptation. And we recognize that the cost of supporting and enabling and encouraging local adaptation is that sometimes that'll go really well and be more powerful than what you would have done, what would have happened if they'd stuck strictly to your implementation guidelines. And sometimes it will be worse than what would have happened if people had stuck strictly to your implementation guidelines. And so it's kind of what happens whenever you grant freedom to people. Some people use their agency well and make positive choices and do good things, and other people, for a range of reasons, kind of use their agency poorly and make poor choices. And you know, so it really comes down to kind of your philosophy about other people and the kind of degrees of freedom that you want to grant them in their work. You can maintain that you can try to ensure that everything will always have kind of a consistent level of quality, but I don't think consistency is what we really want, given how different the nature of the places and the people and the environments and contexts that we work in might be. But as an educator who's spent a lot of time looking at, you know, pedagogies and worrying about implementation fidelity, and particularly on the research side, how can you say what you can't make any claims about whether my approach works or not, because what you did was so different from what I outlined in my approach that now your research doesn't even really apply anymore because you did something very different than what I'd intended. I think the other thing to realize there is that no matter how strongly you copyright your materials, when people stand up at the front of the room, they're going to adapt them however they want to adapt them anyway, verbally and in the things that they do. There's nothing that you can do in terms of copywriting materials that can change the words that people say at the front of the room while they're doing the training, as much as you might wish there were. So another way of thinking about openness and allowing people to make those adaptations that they think will be important for their students is just recognizing the kind of on the ground truth of implementation and trying to support that more directly. Other thoughts while we're paused here?
I have a couple questions, David. I don't know if it goes beyond the scope of this conversation about open sourcing, but when thinking about open sourcing, it seems that a really great benefit of it is that it does create this potential for subsequent innovation and people remixing and adapting. How do you create like a connected ecosystem for that so that it kind of builds collectively, as opposed to we put our one thing out there, now a bunch of people are just kind of energetically all over the place doing that? How do you sort of harness that energy in one place? And then related but not exactly the same, any thoughts or recommendations around kind of floating above the field, listening in for the remixing so you can kind of share back lessons and be sort of that that reflection to the field as to when people are remixing, this is working really well. So hopefully those were clear. They're similar but not the same.
Yeah. The first one is certainly clear. Let me share my screen again and show you one of the other licenses that that Creative Commons provides, which is a license that is going to look like it solves the issue that you're talking about, but doesn't quite. So let me explain that. This is what is called the attribution share-alike license. So this gives people all the same freedoms to copy and distribute and remix and transform. Still requires them to attribute you as the original author, but has one further requirement, and that is that if the person makes any changes to your original and distributes those changes in any way, those changes must be licensed under exactly the same license that you licensed the original work under, which is this attribution share-alike license. So this kind of ensures that any new versions that get created will always have an open license on them. However, what it doesn't do anything about is requiring the person who makes the new version to contact you or make you aware that the new version exists or register their new version with some central repository. Like this will ensure that the Spanish translation is licensed under Creative Commons license, but it does nothing to make you aware of the fact that it exists.
Yeah.
And there is no license that can do that. At least there's not one that exists today. I'm sure if we thought really hard about it, we could come up with some boutique license that would require that. But boutique licenses are bad, and that's conversation. That's a different conversation. You know, so there are like for example, Wikipedia. If you ever have scrolled to the bottom of Wikipedia, this is the license that Wikipedia uses. They use the attribution share-alike license, and they do that because they know that you know, they're fully anticipating there are going to be millions of people contributing, you know, to this piece of work. And as those people are contributing to this piece of work, we don't want to try to individually manage the rights of every person who ever makes any contribution. So by saying, here's a Wikipedia article, and if you hit edit and make some changes to it and hit save, by using the by SA license, we guarantee that the new version that they just saved that has their contributions is licensed under exactly the same license as the first version of the article. And then all that problem of managing contributions and people's IP and all that goes away. So if you're doing a project that has a Wikipedia-like kind of feel where you expect you know, hundreds or more of people to be making contributions to it, then this license is an interesting one to look at. If you're not in that specific use case, I think the view of the community is that we should give as much freedom to the person on the other end, the receiver of the open resource that's going to go do something with it. We should give them as much flexibility as we can because we don't understand their circumstance and their context and what they're trying to accomplish. And the share-alike condition might prohibit them from doing something useful that they're trying to do in their local context. And so generally speaking, you'll see that attribution only license is the one that's favored for kind of education projects writ large, where there's not, you might have little contributions coming in where a person says, hey, I made this infographic for you, and you should get that put, you should consider adding this to the official version of the resource. That getting those contributions to come back is really more about community building and outreach and engagement and making people feel like they're a part of what you're doing. When a contribution does come back, finding a way to highlight that to the community and lift it up and say, look at this, we've got this great new chapter in our book now on this topic that wasn't there before, and it was contributed by this member of our community, and we're so grateful for that. Lifting them up and showing them as being kind of good examples of people who are contributing to the common work. But it has nothing to do with licensing. That has everything to do with the way that you establish and manage relationships with people, in the group that you're trying to work with. So there's not really a legal or a licensing answer to that question, unless you're working in this kind of Wikipedia sort of mode where you're going to have hundreds or thousands of people all contributing in a highly decentralized and uncoordinated way. Then you might want this attribution share-alike license. But otherwise, I'd really encourage you to think about using the attribution license for this kind of stuff.
Great, that was very helpful.
That I see fellows use, I think you can see my screen. This is an example from the Dinner Party, which is a fellow organization. Megan, I think, Lennon, and others may as well. But anyway, I won't get into their model, but the Dinner Party, their organization, has this guidebook. I actually don't think it's under Creative Commons, but so this isn't a licensing thing, but just necessitating the email address in order to download the PDF for free, like to download the guide for free. But that just might, if it seems like that's a tech tool that is pretty accessible, and then you've got the contact so that if you do have an infrastructure for engagement of people downloading it, just to know how they're using it, maybe every 6 months you check in with anybody who's downloaded it and said, how have you used this? That might be just a practical add-on that could help. We're coming to 10 minutes before the hour. So maybe, I'm curious if there are other burning questions. Otherwise, I'd also love to hear how you've seen this help people get farther toward indirect impact, or what is I'd love to hear what that's looked like for organizations similar to this, if you have one to pull out of your hat, David. But maybe first to go around with other lingering questions in our last moments.
I have one I could ask if no one else has one.
Great.
How are you, maybe this isn't the right question, so you can pass if you don't like it, but I'm curious. We definitely have some challenges as we've begun unleashing and opening up and explaining to funders the difference between kind of the direct and indirect impact. Mm-hmm. And so internally, we're trying to change our culture and our language and the way we talk about it. But we know, for example, there are just some where we have the hypothesis that some foundations will just never be okay with it. And I'm just wondering if you ran into that, or if you found good ways to talk about direct versus indirect with funders.
Yeah, so I think understanding what am I trying to say? I think for some funders, you have to find a way to translate your indirect impacts into direct impacts, right? So if that means that you've got some, and maybe I'll use this as an opportunity to address this this other example about requiring email addresses to download a copy of a work. I think the open community would have very strong negative feelings about that approach, actually, because you're putting a barrier between people and the work. And if the work was CC licensed, then one person would go put in their email, download it, and then they could redistribute it to people however they wanted to. And this, I don't know if you've ever heard the phrase that the internet routes around censorship, but the internet also routes around, or at least the open community in particular, routes around barriers to access. But we have seen very successful work by people who say, here this is, download it, and if you give us your email address, we'll keep you up to date about new copies, new versions, improved things that come available so that you always have kind of the latest version. But trying to get people to sign up by explaining to them what the value of signing up is, rather than requiring them to sign up to get access to information. But as part of that sign-up process, like Rice University has a project called OpenStax where they create complete textbooks that have a Creative Commons license on them. And they make it very clear on their website that their ongoing funding and their ability to update the textbooks and even create new textbooks depends on them being able to communicate to their funders the impact of the work that they're doing. So they have a very kind of clear statement about that somewhere, and then they invite faculty to fill out a survey that is just, how many sections are you going to use this in? How many students are going to be impacted? And they're constantly, every time you hear them speak, every time you hear them do anything, they're kind of banging the drum about how our funders really want to know what kind of impact we're having, but we depend on you to tell us that, because they don't actually have any direct impact, right? The organization that creates these openly licensed textbooks doesn't actually teach any courses. So they're a 100% indirect impact organization, as it were. And so they're just very clear about that message, about getting the word out to people that, we're able to provide this to you because people provide us with information about how it's getting used, and we can pass it on to funders who continue our funding and let us do that. So I think there is a kind of drumbeat that you can establish in your communications and in your messaging and your presentations about how and why that's important, that will allow you to translate your indirect impact into direct impact that you can feed back up to your funders. Does that make sense? Okay, great.
Thank you.
My purse. You can bring my purse here and I'll get it for you.
Other, it's okay. I love your purse. I can't even see it, and I'm sure it's great. I'm surprised one of my kids hasn't wandered into the room yet. That's what makes every video conference complete, is when somebody's kid shows up.
Yeah. At Ashoka, we welcome the full self. Your purses and your kids.
So, you asked about an anecdote. A very personal one. The very first book that I ever worked on as an academic, this would have been in, I think we published it in 99 or in 2000. We openly licensed, and it was a real wrestle with the publisher, who had no idea what, this is 4 or 5 years before Creative Commons even existed, to help them understand what we were trying to do. And basically the deal I had to do with them was I edited the contract so that the publisher kept, on the money side, all of the royalty that in the standard contract would have come to me in exchange for permission to openly license the book. Because there just weren't examples to point at of how that was going to work. Anyway, we got this book out. We got it out under an open license. And about a year and a half, some relatively short period of time after we put it out, I got an email from some folks in Spain who had gone through and translated the entire book into Spanish and sent it back to me as a gift, that basically saying, thank you for the open license. This makes it, nobody would have ever paid for a Spanish translation of this. We wouldn't have been able to use it in our context. There are people in South America and other places that would, be able to use it. So you gave us permission to do this kind of work. We've done it. We're sending it back to you so that others can kind of benefit from that. And that idea that when you send things out, you don't know what kind of goodness is going to happen, but the goodness finds its way back to you if you trust the process of giving up control. It's really the places where you try to kind of half hang on to control, half be open, that you end up getting into trouble, has been my experience. You just have to trust the process, let it work, and good things that you never anticipated, better things than you ever anticipated, will end up making their way back to you.
If there's time, I have one more question, Brittany.
Yes. Let's go ahead and we can make it the last one, unless Amanda, Crystal, if something.
Yeah, I definitely don't want to dominate. If there are other questions, I can always connect with David later.
Great. Yeah, let's hear.
Well, I think
so-
Amanda was going to say something.
Oh yeah,
Sorry.
Amanda, go.
Maybe mine's fast. I don't know. I had a question too. Like, we're new and we're learning fast, and I feel a little anxiety about putting stuff out that reflects active learning, and that maybe in a year I'm going to say, "Oh, I wouldn't frame it that way anymore," but it's sort of out in the world. Your thoughts on that? Maybe it's just a pep talk that I need. I don't know.
Well, there's a mantra. There's a mantra around this very issue, and that mantra is release early, release often. And so if you take the approach of waiting until it's good enough to put something out, that it's likely that you will persuade yourself that it's never good enough and you'll never release anything. The other side of that is that the earlier you release something, especially if you release it openly, the earlier you get people involved in reviewing and providing feedback and helping you make it better. And there's nothing that says you only can release once a year. Like, you can release little updates, like you can update the website every day or every week as people spot things that could be better or suggest feedback and improvement to you. But there's very much a sense of trying to work in the open of, here's my current best attempt at doing this, and I'm putting it out because I know that you can all help me make it better. And I'll even acknowledge you as I incorporate, suggestions and improvements that you make in the new version of the document that I make. But don't wait a long time. So release early, and once you release early, don't let that first version sit there for 6 months. Like, release early, release often. Be engaged with your users, listen to what they're saying, create opportunities, whether it's through surveys or being clear about what email you want stuff sent to, or sitting down with them face to face. Create ways for them to send you back thoughts, feelings, suggestions, recommendations they have about it. And then incorporate those and find ways to hold up and show the community, hey, here are the people who gave us these great ideas, in some acknowledgement section or something like that. Like, name them and name the thing that they submitted, this picture, or this infographic or whatever it was that really captured this thing, and create a culture that recognizes and rewards contributions by folks. And as you reward them, then you provide greater incentives for people to, engage in that kind of behavior. And then you get into this virtuous cycle of, every week you're getting interesting contributions back from people that might be really small, but that allow you to improve it in some way. And if you think about now to 12 months from now, where that product would be with just you and your team kind of sitting on it internally trying to work, versus maybe a monthly drumbeat of, here's the new version that incorporates all the changes we've had from the community. A year from now, the version of that you released 11 times and got feedback on and improved is going to be a lot better than what just your group by itself will be able to do without involving your users and your community in that way. Release early, release often.
A mantra for open sourcing and a mantra for life.
Yes.
This reminds me actually of this huddle with Jerry White. And he's actually just talking about like the journey of like letting go of control that he had to go through in order to scale his idea, and like in scaling this solution for like reducing the use of landmines, it was successful enough or like absorbed locally enough that the need for his organization was no longer. And so he dissolved it, and just like talking about his personal journey with that. Anyway, I shared it in the chat. It's just like how these things are inextricably linked with like, what is it like to give up control, and like the vulnerability of that inherently.
Yeah, and the humility of it, because at the end of the day, the real reason that you would do this is you recognize you can't understand every context. You can't understand every need. You can understand the people that you've managed to work with and the work that you have done. But you have to trust that other people have a better understanding of their local problem than you do, and empower them to use whatever it is that you've made in the way that makes the most sense locally.
Megan, if it's okay, I know we're past time, and what I'd love to do is or I don't know if people have a few more minutes, or otherwise I might just have you two connect offline.
I'm good either way.
Go for it, Megan.
I don't want to take up folks' time, but I can connect with you at another time, or just shoot it through an email, David.
Great. That's fine too.
I think what's really interesting is that the folks joining this call, like the kind of content and the stage that you're in exploring is really similar. And so I'll send this follow-up with everybody just on CC. If you'd like to, I'm wondering if the four of you like continue or manage to wrangle David for counsel, or a check-in 6 months down the road to see where people are at. But yeah.
Brittany, let me put in one more plug before we quit. I'm going to put
Please.
something in the chat box.
All the plugs.
I want to plug our conference that's coming up. There's the URL. This is a conference about doing open in the context of education. So, we're talking about substitute teacher training and teacher professional development and just broader training kinds of things. This is a conference that we run every year, this is the 14th annual conference. We just posted the program yesterday. There's over 250 panels and sessions and roundtables and things like that. If you're interested in getting involved in this community of thinking more about how open relates to education, this is the place to be. For that. It's in Anaheim. You can see on the screen there, it's in Anaheim, October 11 through 13. So.
Awesome.
Plug.
Great.
Thank you.
I'm going to go ahead and stop this recording. Thank you, friends, for joining.